imagine standing in a line of, well, just idling cars, and it's 2.1 kilometers long.
That's a massive line.
Right. And you aren't stuck in a traffic jam. You're just waiting to buy fuel at a gas station right in the middle of Addis Ababa.
Just watching the hours tick by.
Exactly. Just productivity completely draining away.
Yeah.
And the enterprise that's responsible for selling you that fuel, they just posted over $1 billion in net profit.
Which is, it's wild to think about when you're sitting in that line.
It really is. So welcome to today's deep dive. We're coming to you from the team right here at Addis Fortune, Ethiopia's largest English weekly newspaper.
Happy to be here to unpack all this with you.
So we're taking a stack of stories from our latest weekly editions, and we're looking at a single kind of hidden theme connecting all of them, which is movement and friction.
Yeah, movement and friction. It really captures the moment. Ethiopia is a country with, sky-high ambitions to keep moving forward.
Right. But today, we are going to look under the hood at the literal financial and political bottlenecks that are stalling the engine.
Because there's a lot of stalling happening right now.
There is. So by the end of this conversation, you'll understand the hidden machinery powering and sometimes paralyzing Ethiopia's economy today.
It really is a striking paradox to explore. We have these multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects advancing at lightning speed on one side, and then on the other you have everyday systems hitting absolute physical limits, like that fuel line you mentioned.
Let's start right there, actually, with that visual.
Mm-hmm.
Picture an aerial view of the capital. You've got this line of buses, minibuses, heavy trucks, and SUVs.
Just snaking through the city.
Right. It starts behind the old Harambee Hotel, winds past Ambassador Park, crawls by the Sheraton Addis, loops toward the Vilwuha thermal baths, and finally ends at a total gas station. It is a grueling physical manifestation of scarcity.
Specifically, a chronic shortage of diesel. That's what's causing it.
Yes, diesel. But looking at the financials reported in Addis Fortune, the Ethiopian Petroleum Supply Enterprise, or the EPSE, they don't look like a struggling entity at all.
No, on paper they look incredibly strong.
Right. Their revenue from contracts surged to 457.35 billion birr in the 2025 fiscal year. So explain the mechanics here.
Sure.
If an enterprise claims $1 billion birr net profit and is moving massive amounts of money, why are the trucks parked outside the Sheraton with empty tanks?
Well, because there's a massive gulf between a paper profit and, liquid reality.
Okay, what do you mean by liquid reality?
Let's look at the actual cost of doing business. The EPSE imports nearly 4 billion tons of petroleum products.
4 billion tons, that's huge.
It's staggering, and that costs over $4 billion. Now, while their revenue surged, their cost of sales climbed even faster, hitting over 496 billion birr.
Oh, wow. So the costs are just outpacing the revenue completely.
Exactly. But the real friction, the real bottleneck, lies in a mechanism called the Fuel Price Stabilization Fund.
Okay, the stabilization fund. How does that work?
Well, the EPSE has 183.56 billion birr sitting as receivables from this exact fund.
Wait, let me stop you there. A receivable means someone owes you that money, right?
Correct. It's money you're supposed to get.
So having 183 billion birr in receivables from the stabilization fund is essentially like having a massive trust fund, but the bank account is completely frozen.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Like, you are technically wealthy on paper, but you still can't afford to buy a tank of diesel on the international market today.
That is the exact mechanism of the stall right there. A receivable is, at the end of the day, just a promise.
And you can't buy oil with a promise.
No, you absolutely cannot hand a promise to an international oil supplier. They want hard cash.
Right.
And at the same time, the enterprise's physical inventories have doubled, which ties up even more cash. So the financial machinery is just lagging totally behind the physical demand.
So the money is caught in this administrative bottleneck.
Exactly. Which means the liquid diesel doesn't reach the pumps, and the physical trucks end up parked on the asphalt, bringing a huge chunk of the city's commerce to a total standstill.
Okay, so if the capital is paralyzed, waiting for physical fuel to move, what happens when the literal flow of money stops entirely?
That's when things get truly devastating.
Because, reading through the reports from the Tigray Regional State, the bottleneck there isn't diesel, it's federal budget transfers.
Yeah, and the human toll of that specific financial freeze is staggering. We really need to look at the story of Falej Azmalash.
She's the health worker, right?
Yes, she is a 53-year-old resource mobilization coordinator in the Regional Health Bureau. And for 26 years, her government paycheck was the absolute bedrock of her household stability.
26 years, that's her entire career.
Right. She takes home a net monthly salary of 13,000 birr, and out of that, 8,000 birr goes to rent, and 3,000 goes to her daughter's schooling.
So that leaves almost nothing for food or transport.
Exactly. But since February, her salary has completely stopped arriving. Just nothing.
She told reporters, let me find the quote. Here. I can't pay rent. I can't send my child to school. I go to work hungry.
It's heartbreaking.
And because transport costs have tripled in the region, she now walks 3 hours every single day just to get to a job that isn't even paying her.
A 3-hour walk on an empty stomach. And she's just one of over 141,000 civil servants in the region trapped in this limbo.
That's a massive number of people.
It is. It includes teachers, too. Like 50-year-old Sij Abera, who stands in front of his 6th grade math students while being completely consumed by the stress of how he will feed his own kids.
So how does an entire regional payroll just vanish? Like, where did the money go?
Well, to understand the mechanics of this freeze, we have to objectively map out the deeply strained political backdrop here.
Right, because this doesn't happen in a vacuum.
No, not at all. Following the breakdown of relations between the TPLF, which is the governing party of the region, and the ruling Prosperity Party, a devastating civil war broke out.
And that war severely damaged the region's formal economy.
Completely. Banks struggled, businesses closed up shop, and local tax collection was effectively dismantled.
Right.
So because of that economic collapse, the region became heavily dependent on federal budget subsidies just to function. We are talking about an allocation of close to 24 billion birr.
24 billion, which is what, roughly 1% of the entire country's GDP?
Exactly. And the region needs about 2.8 billion birr a month just to cover basic salaries.
That's to pay people like Fij and Siege.
Right. But they only generate about 700 million locally, so they are entirely reliant on that federal lifeline.
Okay, so what is the stated reason for the freeze? Why cut off the lifeline?
Well, there are two entirely conflicting narratives here. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has publicly accused TPLF leaders of continuing military preparations.
Okay.
He alleges they are exploiting local mineral resources, like gold, to finance the procurement of weapons instead of actually funding their region.
I see. And what is the response from the region?
On the other side, regional authorities categorically deny this. They argue that the federal government is deliberately freezing budget subsidies as a punitive measure.
A punishment.
Yeah. They say it unfairly punishes ordinary citizens and risks the total collapse of essential public services.
It's just a tragic paradox for the people caught in the middle. I mean, the formal economy collapsed during the war, making the region entirely dependent on federal transfers.
Yes.
But now those exact transfers are frozen due to this high-level political standoff. How do everyday people survive when high-level politics cuts off their only lifeline?
It's incredibly difficult. Felish herself actually asked the reporters, "We aren't politicians. Why are we being punished?"
Wow, that hits hard.
It does, and that's a question without a systemic answer right now. And the thing is, the consequences of this financial freeze don't stay confined to unpaid rent or hungry teachers.
Where else does it bleed into?
When you start a system of capital, it leads directly into life and death logistical failures, particularly in the healthcare sector.
Okay, that brings us to the new data from CHAMPUS, the Child Health and Mortality Prevention Surveillance.
Yes, their latest report.
The report notes that in 2023, Africa recorded nearly 1 million stillbirths, and Ethiopia carries one of the heaviest burdens of that.
It's a grim statistic.
It is. But the most alarming part of this report, the part that really stood out, is that 72% of these stillbirths are preventable.
72%. That is just staggering.
It's almost 3/4.
Right, and they are preventable with timely medical intervention. When you look at maternal mortality more broadly, the Ethos study reviewed cases across 13 hospitals.
And what did they find?
They found that 80% of maternal deaths happen in the postpartum period, very often due to hemorrhage. Yet only 22% of the women who died were ever admitted to an intensive care unit.
Wait, only 22% made it to the ICU. Why?
Because in over 80% of these cases, the root cause was a delay. A delay in seeking care, a delay in reaching a facility, or receiving adequate care upon arrival.
Oh, I see. So it's like we have 21st century medical knowledge.
Yeah.
We know exactly how to treat a postpartum hemorrhage.
Yes, the medical science is there.
But we're forced to rely on 19th century logistics to get the patient to the doctor.
Exactly. And going back to Tigray for a second, the Regional Health Bureau there warned that ambulance services had become nearly impossible due to severe fuel shortages and a complete lack of budget.
So it's a complete mechanical failure of the state's emergency response.
Yeah.
The ambulances literally can't run.
Which forces a reliance on what we can basically call micro-resilience.
Micro-resilience. Give me an example of that.
Well, Dr. Obi Seifu, who is an assistant professor with 15 years in maternal care, proposed a really unconventional solution.
Okay.
He suggested giving taxi-hailing companies incentives to transport women in labor.
Taxi apps, like instead of ambulances.
Yes. When the macro system, the government ambulances, the federal health budgets, the fuel supply chains, when all of that breaks down, a taxi driver effectively becomes a first responder.
But, I mean, is a taxi really a substitute for an ambulance? I mean, it feels like we are applying a tiny Band-Aid to a massive systemic hemorrhage.
It's definitely a Band-Aid. But when it's all you have, it's a lifesaver.
True, but the country can't rely on emergency patches forever. To fix these massive macro-budget failures, Ethiopia has huge ambitions to grow its way out of the crisis.
Right, they want to scale up.
Specifically through special economic zones, or SEZs.
The ambition is certainly there. The Industry Park Development Corporation has a target of generating $1 billion in exports by next year.
$1 billion, that's massive.
It is, and a huge part of that hope is pinned on developers setting up solar cell manufacturing in the Hawassa Special Economic Zone.
And $1 billion in exports would bring in a ton of hard currency, which the country desperately needs.
Exactly.
But, true to the theme of our deep dive today, developers are hitting a massive wall of financial friction.
Friction is the perfect word for it.
To even play in these zones, the minimum capital requirement for a developer is set at $75 million.
Right, $75 million just to get your foot in the door.
You would think the banks would roll out the red carpet for that kind of investment.
You'd think so, yeah.
But instead, developers are finding that getting access to credit is incredibly difficult. Even though the National Bank of Ethiopia allowed bank branches to open inside these zones, only 4 banks are currently operating there.
Just 4.
And the fees just to do business are astronomical.
Yeah.
Letters of credit fees are reaching 10%.
10%. Just think about the mechanics of what a letter of credit actually is.
Break it down for me.
It's a local bank's formal promise to a foreign supplier that they will get paid in dollars.
Okay.
But when the central banking system is starved for hard currency, local banks take on massive risk by making that promise.
Because they might not actually have the dollars when the bill comes due.
Exactly. So to offset the risk, they won't be able to source the dollars in time to pay the supplier. They jack up the fees to 10%.
Wow. Imagine you're a developer who just put down the required $75 million to build in one of these zones.
Right.
You go to the bank to start moving money to pay your solar cell suppliers, and they hit you with a 10% fee just to move your own money.
It's a huge penalty.
It feels like the government is stepping on the gas pedal to reach $1 billion in exports, while the banks are pulling the emergency brake at the exact same time.
Well, the banks are pulling the brake because they are terrified of crashing.
What do you mean?
The central bank recently ran stress tests, and the results showed that under a severe credit shock scenario, 4 banks would fall below regulatory capital thresholds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they would immediately need 8.3 billion birr in fresh capital just to restore their safety buffers.
Just to not go under.
Exactly. So because the banks feel so vulnerable, they hoard capital, they demand traditional collateral that foreign developers might not have locally, and the exporters are left starving for credit.
So if legitimate developers are being squeezed out by 10% bank fees and dry credit lines, what happens to the businesses that absolutely have to get foreign exchange to survive?
Well, they get desperate.
Do they just close up shop, or do they look for a side door?
When a vital resource like foreign exchange is legally bottlenecked, a black market for access inevitably opens up.
It always does.
Always. And that is exactly what federal investigators allege was happening at the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, or the CBE.
The details of this case are just wild.
They really are.
Nuri Hussein, who was the vice president of CBE's interest-free banking division, was arrested. Federal investigators allege that Nuri demanded bribes to disperse a $2.9 million Forex authorization to a company called AfroSalt Plec.
And keep in mind, the National Bank had already authorized this Forex for AfroSalt to buy construction materials.
Right, the money was already cleared.
But investigators claim Nuri made the actual release of the funds conditional on massive kickbacks, ranging from 300,000 to 3.9 million birr.
3.9 million birr for a kickback.
Yeah. The investigation suggests a highly organized, alleged extraction scheme.
How did it work?
Police claim that access to financing was tied to promises of promotions for bank staff, using his secretary as an intermediary. Oh, wow.
They even flagged bank accounts belonging to Nuri's brother and sister-in-law. They're investigating if those accounts were used as channels for the illicit funds, following an internal audit that spotted breaches in directives.
How does an executive in the interest-free banking division even have the leverage to extract an illegal under-the-table premium? I mean, the irony is thick.
Very thick. And I should note, the defense is fighting this aggressively.
What's their argument?
The defense's argument centers on mechanical authority. Nuri's lawyers argue that he lacked the actual administrative authority to grant promotions, so he couldn't have weaponized them as bribes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Furthermore, they argue that the internal procedure doesn't actually require a written letter from the National Bank for loan disbursement in the specific way investigators claim.
So they're saying the paperwork rules are misunderstood.
Right. The federal high court initially granted him a $200,000 Bowman Burr bail, stating he wasn't a flight risk. But the police immediately appealed.
Let me guess. They said he'd tamper with evidence. Exactly. They argued his seniority would allow him to do just that. Now, the Supreme Court is deciding if that bail stands.
Does a massive case like this suggest we just have a few bad actors? Or is it an inevitable symptom of the intense Forex squeeze we just talked about?
Honestly, it highlights a systemic vulnerability. When access to dollars is choked off at the macro level, the individuals holding the keys to the few remaining vaults gain immense informal power.
Yeah.
The role transitions from being a purely administrative banking job to an opportunity for massive rent seeking.
And it's not just corporate executives allegedly exploiting these choke points. Everyday people are feeling the friction too.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, expensive transport, the fuel queues we mentioned earlier. It makes the public incredibly vulnerable to anyone offering a shortcut.
Let's look at the electric vehicle scam.
Ah, yes. The fintech investment Pollock case.
Crazy.
This case is a masterclass in exploiting public desperation through manufactured credibility.
Break it down for us. The founders, Daniel Yohannes and Gourmet Teklamichael, incorporated the company in 2024, just recently.
Yeah, and they presented themselves to the public as the exclusive importers of BYD Seagull electric vehicles.
And their pitch was incredibly seductive.
Very. They said, pay half the price up front, about $950,000 Burr, and we will deliver a brand new EV in 3 months.
Which sounds amazing.
Plus, you get 5 years to pay off the rest, completely interest-free.
It offered a direct bypass to the fuel queues and transportation nightmares we've been talking about.
Exactly. Who wouldn't want that?
Well, investigators allege that nearly 1,430 people took the deal, handing over a staggering 1.7 billion Burr.
1.7 billion Burr. How do you convince over 1,000 people to hand over almost $1 million Burr each for cars that don't even exist yet? Like, what is the psychological mechanism at play here?
Well, they heavily invested in a trust heuristic, basically a mental shortcut.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
In an environment filled with economic anxiety, people look for reliable signals. The founders allegedly gave BYD Song Plus vehicles, which are worth about 8 million Burr each, to prominent advertising gurus, famous actors, and TikTok personalities.
Oh, I see. So they seeded the cars to famous people.
Exactly. They even staged a massive fake showroom at Mescal Square, gathering vehicles from random sources just to simulate a massive import arrival.
Wow, just to make it look like a huge operation.
Right. When a consumer sees a trusted local celebrity endorsing a product, it completely short-circuits their critical thinking.
Because they think, well, if the TikTok guy has one, it must be real.
The celebrity acts as a bridge over the public's natural skepticism. It makes a mathematically impossible deal look like a stroke of luck.
And the prosecution noted that Daniel had allegedly run a similar scheme before with Hello Taxi, collecting over 600 million Burr without delivering.
Yeah, it's essentially snake oil, but heavily optimized for the TikTok era.
But, you know, considering literally everything we've unpacked today.
Yeah, a lot.
The 2.1-kilometer fuel lines, the frozen regional budgets, the banking stress, the alleged Forex extortion, and these EV scams.
Yeah.
How is it possible that Ethiopia is still executing massive, legitimate engineering triumphs?
It seems contradictory, doesn't it? But it's because certain entities have learned how to build a firewall between their ambitions and the domestic friction.
Okay, that brings us to Ethiopian Airlines and their new Bishoftu International Airport project.
Yes, this is a fascinating contrast.
This is a $12.5 billion airport mega project. But to make a two-airport system work between Bole and Bishoftu, They are building a $954 million railway and transport link to connect them.
A massive undertaking.
So given the brutal credit crunch starving the special economic zones that we just talked about, how does Ethiopian Airlines manage to fund a billion-dollar railway without getting dragged down by the local banking strat?
The brilliance is entirely in the financial architecture. Ethiopian Airlines separated the railway component from the core airport construction using a project finance model.
Okay, what does that mean?
They hired the London-based legal firm Clyde & Co. to establish a special purpose vehicle, or an SPV.
What is an SPV actually doing in this context? Like, physically?
So normally, if the airline takes out a massive loan for a railway, that debt sits on their main books.
Right.
If the domestic economy hits a crisis, foreign lenders panic because the airline looks risky. But an SPV is a completely separate legal entity created just for this railway.
Oh, I get it.
By bundling the engineering, procurement, and construction into a turnkey contract within this SPV, they shift the performance risk away from the airline and onto the contractors.
This essentially bubble wraps the project.
Exactly. It speaks the language of international capital, completely insulated from local liquidity shocks.
It bypasses the friction entirely. And the strategy is working too. The Chinese ambassador and a delegation from the Export-Import Bank of China have already visited the site.
Yeah, there's serious interest.
Italy's Minister of Economy and Finance has expressed readiness to support components of the airport. They are targeting initial financing approval by early 2026.
It really is a masterstroke in macro engineering. While domestic developers fight for a 10% letter of credit, the airline plugs directly into the global financial grid.
It's like two different worlds.
Completely.
So let's bring all these threads together. Today, we've looked at the hidden machinery of a nation wrestling with the friction of its own systems.
We really covered a lot of ground.
We did. We unpacked the accounting paradox behind a 2.1-kilometer fuel queue. We looked at the human cost of frozen budgets in Tigray and how financial starvation leads to life-and-death logistical failures in healthcare.
Right.
We examined the severe credit crunch suffocating our special economic zones and the dark side of that scarcity, from alleged Forex corruption at the bank to elaborate EV scams on TikTok.
And yet, rising above it all, we see Ethiopian Airlines engineering financial firewalls to build a multi-billion-dollar future. It really leaves you with a profound contrast to consider.
What do you mean?
Think about the micro-resilience of a health worker walking 3 hours to an unpaid job, or a taxi driver acting as an emergency ambulance. Now contrast that with the macro engineering of an internationally financed mega project. What will Ethiopia look like when the gap between that ground level struggle and those sky-high ambitions finally closes?
That is an amazing question to mull over as you navigate the city this week. We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been great.
Keep questioning the systems, the bottlenecks, and the hidden machinery moving the world around you. On behalf of the entire Addis Fortune team, thanks for listening and goodbye.